The References section should give the reader a pathway to access the same resources that the author used in the research. The references should be titled References, not Bibliography, and the title should be centered but not bolded because References is a page title, not a section heading. If you only have one reference, the page should be titled Reference. When you're deciding what sources to include in your references, remember that except for personal communication, all cited sources should be included in the references. Similarly, all references must have at least one corresponding citation in the text. Order the references alphabetically by the author's last name. If you are working with a source by multiple authors, do not alphabetize the authors' names within the reference. The author's name should appear in the same order in the reference as in the original source, because the order of the names indicates who is the primary author, secondary author, and so forth. Here are two more basic formatting items. All references should have a hanging indent on the second and subsequent lines, and references should be double-spaced without additional spaces between the references. For a sample page of references, please see the references in the APA Help Guide. For more information regarding formatting the reference page, please search Right Answers by keyword or refer to the APA Help Guide. The APA style rules divide resources into two categories, periodicals and non-periodicals. Periodicals are published on a predictable schedule, such as a journal or magazine, whereas non-periodicals are one-off publications, such as books. The type of information required in a reference differs between periodicals and non-periodicals, so it's helpful to identify which type of resource you're using. If you need help with identifying what type of resource you're working with, please contact the RRU librarians for their assistance. This slide presents a generic reference to an online periodical article, such as a journal article, and shows what fields are necessary within the reference. My goal with this slide is not to instantly overwhelm you with information, but rather to show you how the fields break out. Author, date, title of article, title of periodical, volume and issue numbers, page range, and the electronic location of the resource. If you learn the rules for each of these fields, the process of creating a reference can be a little less overwhelming because the reference has an ordered structure, rather than it being a collection of random details. If the resource has one author, the name should be presented as the author's last name and first initial, never the person's full name. If the author provides a second name or initial in the original, you can include that initial in your reference. For two authors, as shown in this slide, the correct formatting is last name, comma, first initial, period, comma, ampersand, which is the symbol for and, last name, comma, first initial, period. There should always be a comma before the ampersand. To see an example of how to cite a resource by 3 or more authors, please search Right Answers or refer to the APA Help Guide. How you present the date in your reference depends on the resource you're referencing. A reference to a book or journal article will only provide the year of publication, whereas a reference to an article from a daily newspaper would provide the full date, which in a reference is presented in the order of year, month, day, without any abbreviations or suffixes. The month should be capitalized. For example, 2015, January 22, not 2015, Jan 22nd. The capitalization of the title of the article should be in sentence case, which means that only the first word in the subtitle, and proper nouns should be capitalized. For example, if the article title included the word Canada, Canada should be capitalized, regardless of where the word appears in the title. The title of the article is not italicized. The title of the periodical should be in title case, which means all major words are capitalized. The title is also italicized. How I remember which title should be italicized is I think about the levels of information that are represented in the titles. The periodical title is the top level of information, whereas the article title is secondary. The top level of information, which represents a freestanding resource, is italicized, whereas the secondary information is not italicized. Similarly, the volume number is the top level of information, whereas the issue number qualifies the volume number, so it's a secondary piece of information. Accordingly, the volume number should be italicized, but the issue number and the brackets around it should not be italicized. Provide the page range where the resource can be found in the periodical. Note that in a reference to a periodical article, the page range doesn't begin with P. or PP. If you retrieved your resource electronically, you need to provide the electronic location details in the reference, even if you printed off the article and read the print version. There are a few different ways of providing this information, such as a DOI, URL, or database name, and I'll go into more detail for each approach in the next few slides. DOI stands for Digital Object Identifier, and DOIs are the preferred approach to referencing resources that have been assigned them because they provide stable retrieval information about a resource. DOIs are most commonly found in resources like books and journal articles. When a DOI is available, all a reader needs to do to retrieve the resource is search for the DOI online, or if the DOI is in URL form, as shown in the second example, paste the URL into a web browser's address bar. The search results will show the reader where the resource is available, and if the resource is available for free in full text, the resource will be available via the search. If you're searching via Summon, which is the library's search engine, your search results will tell you if your resource has a DOI, either by way of the initial search results or via the details provided in the full description of the resource. Not all resources have a DOI, so if you don't see the DOI listed along with the other information about the resource, such as the author's name, date of publication, and so forth, the resource probably doesn't have a DOI. One last place to check is to look at the resource itself. If there's a DOI, usually that information is displayed on the first page of the resource. For more information, please search right answers by keyword or refer to the APA Help Guide. The APA style rules instruct authors to provide the Uniform Resource Locator, or URL, for resources retrieved online that don't have DOIs. For resources retrieved from an online subscription-based database, the rules ask authors to provide the homepage URL for the database in the reference, which is the formatting shown in the first example on this slide. However, I suggest that students use the approach shown in the second example, as I think it's an easier approach for RRU students. If you accessed a subscription-based database by going through the RRU Library's website, rather than directly from the database's homepage, you had to log in with your RRU username and password to gain that access. You'll know that you're accessing a resource via the library subscription if you see easyproxy.railroads.ca in the URL for your resource. The requirement to log in means providing the database's homepage URL isn't a useful step for students, since most of our students won't access resources via a database's homepage. Instead, I suggest that students provide the specific name of the database in the reference, rather than the homepage URL. This advice is based on information provided in an APA-style resource, so I'm not going totally off book, but I think it's a more convenient approach for our students. By naming the database in the reference, you're telling your reader which database to access, and the information available through the database will be the same, regardless of the points of access. I think of the database as like a spoked wheel, where the database is the center of the wheel, and the points of access are the spokes on the wheel. Whether I access the database via RRU's subscription, through a public library, through a subscription that I personally paid for, via another university's subscription, or some other means, the database in the center of the wheel will be the same. Once the reader has accessed the database, the reference provides sufficient information for the reader to locate the resource. Please note that if you've searched a metadatabase like ProQuest or EBSCOhost, you'll need to identify the specific database where the resource was retrieved. For example, if you search an EBSCOhost, you can choose from 21 databases. When you reference the resource you retrieved, please reference the specific database, for example, Academic Search Premier, not EBSCOhost. If you retrieved the journal article from an open website, you can provide the URL. However, please avoid providing direct URLs to resources that required you to sign in with your RRU username and password, because the URL won't work for anyone outside the RRU community. Again, an easy way to tell if your resource is password protected is to look for easyproxy.railroads.ca in the URL. If you see that in the address, it tells you that you used your RRU access to retrieve the resource. For more information, please search right answers by keyword or refer to the APA Help Guide. The last few slides showed how to reference a periodical. Now we're moving into referencing non-periodicals. On this slide, I've provided examples to references to books and ebooks. Similarly to periodical references, References to books and ebooks also contain fields of information: author, date, title of work, and so forth. The formatting that I discussed in the previous slides regarding authors and dates applies in a non-periodical reference. Also, since the title of the book is the top level of information, the title is italicized. Finally, the book title is in sentence case, which means that the first word of the subtitle, and proper nouns are capitalized. If you're working with a print book, you'll need to provide the publisher's location and name. The logic behind this is that if your reader wanted to find a copy of the book but couldn't locate it elsewhere, you're directing the reader to the publisher, who could then sell your reader the book. Look for the publisher's name and location on the back of the title page, which is also called the verso. If many locations are listed, use the first one in your reference, as that's likely the location of the company's headquarters. If the location is in the United States, provide the city and state abbreviation, such as Seattle, WA. If the location is outside the United States, provide the city and country, for example, Toronto, Canada. The name of the country should not be abbreviated. If you're referencing an ebook, you don't need to provide the physical location of the publisher because that information isn't relevant to your reader. Rather, provide the electronic location of the resource, whether that's a DOI, a URL, or the name of the database where you retrieved the resource. When you're citing a book, use page numbers. If you're working with an ebook that doesn't have page numbers, you can use other types of location references, such as a paragraph number, a section heading, a heading plus a paragraph number, or if the section heading is lengthy, a shortened form of the heading in quotation marks plus a paragraph number. For more information, please see How do I cite something that doesn't have page or paragraph numbers in APA style. You can also search right answers for ebook to find information on citing ebooks and ebook chapters with example in-text citations. If you're citing a web page, you may not be able to find a publication or copyright date for the page. In that case, you can use N.D., which stands for no date, in both the reference and the in-text citations. The page title is in sentence case and isn't italicized. You can also see in this reference that I haven't provided a retrieval date. Retrieval dates are only necessary if the source material is designed to change over time, such as a wiki. Lastly, please note that there shouldn't be a period after the URL, as providing the period could cause the URL to break. The formatting shown in this reference applies to a web page, but if you're citing a report or article retrieved from a web page, you should follow the correct formatting for that document type. To find numerous examples of different reference types, please search right answers by your resource type keyword, such as report or blog post. You've arrived at the last exercise for this presentation. This slide presents a sample reference to a real resource, but there are many mistakes in the reference. If you'd like to practice your referencing skills, please pause this presentation and see if you can identify the 12 errors. Once you think you've identified them all, press play to continue the presentation. The next slide will identify all the errors, and then the following slide will show you the correct version. Here is a list of all the errors in the reference. Please pause the presentation if you'd like extra time to read through them, and then press play when you're ready to continue. Here is the correct version of the reference.